Hey everybody, how you doing? Aaron with you again. So I was looking through some of the past recordings of things that we've done, and we are in the 40s for how many podcasts we've done. That's awesome. I never even thought I would get to this point where I would have this library of people that I've talked to and like all of this shared experiences and hope and just all the positivity that we've really spread. It's an amazing feeling for me, and it really, really is. And I'm glad that you're on this journey with me because, like I said, we're only getting bigger and we're only going to keep going up, and we're going to impact a lot more people than we can ever realize. So today on the podcast, we have Luiza Martin. She's a suicide loss survivor, suicide attempt survivor, and the founder of the Facebook page, Suicide Loss Awareness. She has a very incredible story. She reached out to us actually and said she wanted to be on the podcast. So she gave me a very brief snapshot of her life. And actually, as we were talking on the podcast, I learned more than what she had put in there. And it just was more fascinating to hear about what she's gone through and her experiences and her everyday struggles that she faces. It's something that is very powerful. And I keep using that word because when somebody is vulnerable and can speak up like this, it empowers so many others to do the same. So Luiza has an incredible story. I can't wait for you to hear it. As always, enjoy this one. Let's roll. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Today with me, I have Luiza Martin. She is a suicide loss survivor, suicide attempt survivor, and founder of the Suicide Loss Awareness Facebook page. So, Luiza, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Yeah, no problem.
So it's kind of interesting because you had reached out to us, and I always tell people on every podcast, if you want to share your story, if you want to, have a platform to talk, please email me. Well, sure enough, you were one that emailed me, and I was really happy that you did that because as we were discussing earlier, or just right before I started recording this, is there is power in sharing a story, and it sounds like that you have a very interesting story from what you had told us.
Yes.
So yeah, feel free to start wherever. I would love to hear it.
I don't even know where to start. So I actually lost a friend to suicide and also found my neighbor who died by suicide, and that experience has really shaped who I am today.
Yeah.
Because what it made me realize, I struggle with depression and suicidal tendencies, and what it made me realize is that people out there care, and sometimes people you don't even know are out there that care.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I know I've said it in prior podcasts, is that, I was a police officer for a very long time prior to doing this job. And what was really amazing was, even though I didn't know these people personally, I would come across them and talk with them and connect with them on a level. And they would always say, why do you care? Well, because it's human decency to care about another person.
Right.
So you had said you found your neighbor?
On October 19th of 2015, I found my neighbor. Pretty much the backstory to that is that I was having dinner with a former best friend of mine, and when we got done with dinner, we went home, and it was about 10 o'clock at night, and was, of course, dark out because it was winter. And what had happened is that he ended up jumping out of the 6th floor window.
Oh my God.
And what I had suspected is that there was alcohol involved.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact details
Yeah.
behind it, but like one of the things that was really hard for me to cope at first was the fact that the image was really gruesome.
Right. Right.
Like, it was really gruesome. And when we called the paramedics and the ambulance, it seemed like forever before
Yeah.
they actually showed up.
And in a traumatic situation like that, I mean, time kind of stands still. I mean, just you're kind of waiting. You know help's coming, or you know people are coming, but it probably felt like a lifetime.
Yes, it definitely did.
Wow. You know, we on this podcast we talk about people that have attempted suicide, have dealt with depression and mental illness, and and it's really interesting because this is a perspective that I've never really thought about until we just started talking about, is that I've never actually talked with anybody on the podcast that have ever found somebody that died by suicide, and the traumatic and emotional response has to just be just a very difficult thing to deal with.
Yes, it was very difficult. I think it took me about 3 months, if not more, before I was able to um walk in my own apartment building, like outside of my home.
Yeah.
Sometimes it still affects me, even in my new apartment. I live on the same floor as I did in my old apartment, so there's a lot of external triggers.
Yeah, absolutely. I can only imagine that. I forgot to ask right away, but were you close to this neighbor?
No, but it affected me as though I was.
And that's kind of the point that I definitely wanted to hear, because yeah, even though you don't know somebody, they've now impacted your life in a very significant way, but it's still hard to deal with, I imagine.
Yes, it was very hard. Like, thankfully I was self-teaching myself DBT, which is like life skills ranging from mindfulness to distress tolerance to emotion regulation and interpersonal effectiveness. And it's really beneficial life skills that actually help you through a tough moment.
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes maybe people talk about when they've gone through something traumatic that they would like to talk to a therapist or talk to somebody, and they'll listen and they'll talk, but sometimes they don't provide you with just those simple life skills that people need to overcome something that traumatic.
Thankfully, I have a therapist that focuses on DBT and CBT and as well as talk therapy. So I had a variation of different kind of therapies to kind of build up my life skills, and it really helps because like when I have like those flashbacks from the event come back, I'm able to know what skill to use. Sometimes it's actually pretty hard for me to come up with, in the moment, come up with skills to utilize. But one thing my therapist has suggested, which I've taken her advice, is to actually write down the coping skills that I use and post it on somewhere where I will see it on a regular basis.
Yeah, and especially, you're trying to retrain your brain in a way that you have an emotional response to whatever an external trigger is or whatever a trigger would be, but at the same time you're responding emotionally, whereas logically how to stop that thought, but it's sometimes just hard to do because you haven't fully trained yourself, I can imagine.
Yeah, and one thing my therapist has talked about is like kind of those automatic thoughts that come in your mind, and um a lot of them you actually don't act on. But one thing she has taught me is like how to stop the thought in its tracks and redirect it to something else, as opposed to actually acting on the thought. Like, for example, if I have the thought of like hurting myself, learning how to actually stop the thought in its tracks and using distraction as a form of redirecting those thoughts.
Right, right. And it's sometimes hard for people to think like how simple that is, but it actually is kind of amazing because when you have a thought, initially your brain's going to respond emotionally. That's just how it always will be. But logically, I mean, once you stop and think about whatever it is logically and you redirect to a different whatever you're doing, it really does stop that thought. And I can imagine, and you had referenced earlier saying that you had dealt with depression and also some suicidal tendencies. Would you care to elaborate a little bit more on that if you'd like?
Yeah, I don't mind at all. I've Like I've mentioned to you in my email, I was adopted, and the depression kind of started when I got separated from my birth mom
Yeah.
and my birth dad. And what also happened is that I ended up being put in an orphanage for about a year away from my siblings as well,
Oh my God.
because they ended up hiding and I didn't suspect anything because cops came to our place quite often. So it was a normal routine type of thing
Yeah.
for me. So I didn't suspect anything different. And sure enough, they ended up taking me to the orphanage, and that was when it all started. And then from there, it fluctuated from anything just feeling sad and blue and down in the dumps to actually actively acting out on my suicidal thoughts.
How old were you when you went to the orphanage?
I believe at 7 years old.
Wow. And you went without your siblings, and if you were there for a year?
Yes. And then I got reunited with them after a year, got put in another orphanage with them. That was pretty hard because there was a lot of bullying, and like bullying is my number one trigger for suicidal ideation.
Yeah. Wow. That I can't imagine like that year that I mean, did you have contact with them or was it just completely nothing?
Not at all.
That that in itself is gotta be just a very hard thing to have to go through. And I mean, most of us take for granted the fact that I mean, you come from a home that maybe is not necessarily perfect, but at least you have each other to get taken out of that, and then all of a sudden just completely your whole life changes has to be so overwhelming, I would think. And I could see where any sort of a mental issue would have arose from that.
Yeah, and the hard part also in my lifetime is that my adoptive environment wasn't all that great either. Like, don't get me wrong, my parents were great, but there were some times when they didn't meet my needs as I needed them met, and it it really put a strain on my mental health.
Absolutely. And I mean, you're speaking of your adopted parents, correct?
Yes.
That it is a dynamic that I'm sure is probably most of us would never ever experience, because I mean, you have two people that are there for you, but inside yourself, you know that they're not mom and dad yet.
Yeah, that was kind of hard for me to adjust to. It took me years before I could truly call them mom and dad, because there was that aspect of like, okay, if my adoptive parents are mom and dad, who are my birth parents to me?
Right. Right. And was that ever something that you've figured out for yourself, or like you kind of explained it like you had to figure that out. I mean, kind of elaborate on that.
For me, like I actually cut ties with my birth parents because I have found out that they're pretty toxic and it's not very good for my mental health. So I have cut ties with them, but
Okay.
I still consider them my parents.
Yeah.
It's just a different kind.
Sure. And I think again, who's to tell you how you should address somebody or not? I mean, it's whoever you feel, is appropriate. And when you were growing up with your adoptive parents, did that mental health kind of flourish a bit more, or how exactly did that kind of play a role in your life growing up?
It really got worse in my high school years, where I like was hospitalized almost every other week. And then like when my parents ended up kind of like dumping me in the States, and I've never been in the States before, so it was a complete different environment for me, and adjusting to that like really really spiked my mental health issues. And I had multiple times where I ended up being hospitalized for suicidal ideation.
So you had said that you felt like you were dropped in the United States. What do you mean by that? Like, where were you initially talking about, and then?
I used to live in Germany once I got adopted, and they literally put me on a plane to the States when I turned 18, and I had no uh, set plan as what I was gonna do in the States. So they
Wow.
only paid for like a little for a payphone, paid for a few nights at a hotel, and I had to figure out everything from scratch from there.
What did you end up doing? Like, how did you kind of start out from that?
My sisters actually took me in, and they ended up getting me in a homeless shelter, and that didn't work out too well for me. So then they ended up getting me to a mental health women's shelter, which was specifically for those with mental disabilities. And that was kind of hard at first, but then I kind of got adjusted to it. But when I turned like 21, I started drinking. And one night I ended up drinking so much that I blacked out and it got violent with staff and got kicked out of the group home, which at that moment, my sisters took me in again for about a week. And then my dad's ex-wife took me in. And from there, my aunt and uncle came and took me in for about a month or two. And then they ended up having me move into another group home for mental health. And it was just hard adjustment, like going from being homeless to being homed to homeless again.
Yeah.
Just was really tough for me.
I can only imagine how difficult that would be, going from a place that you could say, okay, I'm home, and then all of a sudden not being there, and then going to a different place, and then that's now home. I can't even imagine how confusing and just frustrating that must be.
Yeah, one of the things that I have actually talked to a former therapist about is the fact that I actually attach my uh, adoption to that homelessness, and how identical it seems.
Yeah, I that does make sense. I mean, I could see how that there could be some very strong ties between those two, and I'm sure anybody could think of it a certain way, but obviously you live it, you experienced that. To go through that, I guess is what I'm trying to say, has got to be so empowering because now you're on the other side of it.
Yeah, now I'm actually in my own apartment and have been living here for like a year, and it's it's really a hard adjustment. Like I struggle with like the hygiene aspect of things, and I struggle with the cleanliness of my apartment. It's just it's a huge adjustment, and one that I haven't quite mastered yet.
Well, and the thing is, though, I mean, you've gone from living with people and people helping you out to now completely it's you, and that's I don't think anybody would just say, yeah, guess what? You have to just change everything. It's just how it's going to be. But at least you are on your own trying, and that's what's amazing.
Yeah, and thankfully, I actually have a mental health team set up here in my town and state. So thankfully, I actually have that help and support when needed. So
And that's
it's not completely on my own.
and I think that's a great thing to kind of lead into, because one, with mental health, it's very, very, very difficult to do it on your own. I mean, I struggle with anxiety and depression on a daily basis, and if I didn't have my support system or my support staff, it would be extremely hard to conquer that every day. So it's amazing that you have that so close to you, where you can always rely on them and help, and they can always help you out.
Yeah, it's really helpful. And I've told my team on numerous occasions how thankful I am to them, because my previous mental health teams have not been helpful at all. They like really um I mean, I understand kind of where they were coming from. They wanted to encourage my independence, but there was a little too much independence for what I needed.
Yeah. But that's really good that you can say that and you can admit that, to say, like, look, I need that help. That's not something I always want to do on my own, because I think a lot of people have that feeling of, I want to do this on my own, I don't need help.
But I love that you're kind of the opposite in some aspects, saying it's okay to have that help.
It took me a while to actually get to that place where I can accept help from others. At times, I will push people away and stuff. It comes with part of my disorder. Sometimes I do push people away because I want to do things on my own.
Right.
And they're like wanting to help me out or whatever, because I also have autism. So it makes it very difficult for everyday life skills for me.
Wow. You have a very, very, very incredible story that what everything you've gone through and are still going through, and you have this amazing positive outlook, and I love hearing that. I love hearing that, you know what, you are in a better spot, but you still need that help, and that still, it shows that, yeah, people can have everything they need in the world, but they can still be struggling internally. And I think that that's a huge point to give you a lot of credit for. I really do.
Yeah, thank you so much. I've also gotten a lot of compliments from people on my progress and stuff. And that's the hard thing for me to kind of accept, is because I have a hard time a lot of the time seeing my progress from day to day. But then when I compare, like, let's say a year apart from each other, I can see my progress. But if it's like from yesterday to today, that is a lot harder to see the progress. So I used to do journaling to kind of um track my progress, but I kind of stopped on that. And now I kind of use the testing that my case management team has set aside every 6 months to kind of track my progress.
And I always think that, it's hard for anybody to see themselves and look at the progress. So you're not alone in that by any means. But it's that old adage of, you're on the outside looking in. That is very true when somebody else can see it and they recognize it. And even with the person that's going through something, to accept that I've made progress or I've done something has to be very hard too, because I struggle with that as well.
Yeah, it's really hard, but yeah, it's so beneficial when you actually can get to that place of like recognizing your progress and stuff like that.
No, absolutely. I give you so much credit for that, because it's not easy. It is not easy. And that kind of a great segue too, because you also run a Facebook page for suicide loss. Kind of, what is that about?
So yeah, my therapist has asked me like a really important question to my recovery and my journey through grief. She asked me, like, how are you living as though your life is a memorial to your friend or your neighbor or whoever you lost? And that's been really sparked a thought in my mind of like, okay, how can I actually live my life as a memorial to my loved one?
Yeah.
And that's what sparked me to create suicide loss awareness, where I'm hoping that it reaches people. And um, my goal of the page is to reduce suicide one person at a time. And that's my goal.
And yeah, and I mean, there's the best thing to do that is to create the awareness, to show people that it's okay to talk about whatever the issue is. You don't have to make suicide a stigma anymore. You can talk about it, because the more that we talk about it, the more comfortable people will feel sharing those stories and feel comfortable admitting to other people that I'm struggling, I'm doing that. So that's very, very important. And I am very happy that there are resources like that out there. I mean, not just from us itself, but I'm glad that there's other organizations and on other Facebook pages that do the same work that we do as well.
Right. I am too, because it actually is a suicide loss page that got me to create a Facebook page, and I also have a group for suicide loss survivors to actually communicate with others who have lost someone to suicide, and it's been really beneficial. And I've seen the people, I don't know if it's possible through text, but you can kind of see that growth and see people's pulse kind of lit up with joy again after a suicide loss,
Yeah.
when they know that they have someone out there who cares enough to actually listen.
That is such a true statement, because we run a survivor of suicide group as well. And I talked with the two people that run it very often, and they have just said how wonderful it is to share about a person that you have lost, or share about, have other people share, to kind of say, hey, we're not alone in this. And there's a lot of people that struggle with it. And it probably gives such a good sense of relief when you get that moment.
Yes, it's been very beneficial, and not only to myself by helping people out, but also to the people who are being helped and helping others. I've seen a lot of growth in my group members and in myself as well with my journey of grief.
And people say often, like, when you get over something, or when you feel like that grief is over, sometimes it never is. And you know what? You grieve the way that you need to grieve, and you feel the way that you need to feel, because that's valid just like that. You don't have to have anybody else tell you how you should feel.
Yeah, that is a very important point, because I I actually hate people saying or implying that you should be over it by now. And it's like every grief journey is unique to the person, and it just really helps to know that it's okay to grieve, and it's okay to go back from one cycle of grief to the next. And some days you may have days where you're acceptance, and then next moment you may be in depression stage again, and that's perfectly okay.
It is. And I always feel for people that say, I should be over this. You shouldn't have to put a timeline on anything like that. That's your own timeline. That's what you need for you. And I think that anybody that tells them that they should be over it, that they need to really reevaluate what they're saying, because it's not right. It's absolutely not right. I do ask a question to everybody that's on the podcast, and it's very, very interpretive to however you want to interpret it. So the question is, what's your advice for anybody that's ever been in your position or has resonated with something that you've said?
As far as helping someone who is suicidal, I usually tell people few important things. One is take the suicide threats seriously. Don't think that, oh, they've never done it before, they're not gonna do it now. That's like, I don't know, but I hate when people tell me that, hey, you've never done it before, you're just talking and you're not gonna go through with it. Some people actually, that is their for some people, that is their number one trigger to actually go through with suicidal ideation and suicidal urges.
Mhm.
The second thing I want to point out is don't be afraid to ask the direct questions. Ask people, are you suicidal? Do you have a plan? Do you have the means to carry out your plan? And another thing I usually add to that is I will ask people, is there anyone with you right now that can keep you safe?
Absolutely.
The third thing, as far as like losing someone to suicide, I will say that the most important thing I can think of to say right now is please, please, please don't feel like it's your fault that they passed away. It's not. I have been told by my former therapist that a lot of people who are suicidal, they end up not telling anyone. And how can you know what to do? And how can you actually act upon the threats and the signs of suicide if you don't actually know that that person is suicidal?
Yeah. I think that's a very good point to bring up, because we always give people the signs and symptoms to look for a suicidal person, but sometimes people don't share those, or they don't show those. And when it happens, people feel so guilty for themselves, saying, well, I should have seen this, or I should have recognized something. Sometimes you just can't. And there's no need to blame yourself, is what I was trying to say.
That's a really important point, because I've struggled with like all the why questions with my suicide loss. And the truth of the matter is that if someone is truly suicidal, there's nothing you can do to really help them.
But you can always try. And I think that's the biggest thing. I think that's the biggest thing. And I think that's an amazing point to end on. And so Luiza, if people want to join your Facebook page, or people want to get a hold of you, how do they do that?
I can definitely email you the links.
Yeah, we'll definitely put those in the show notes. So you just check those below and it'll be there. And like I said, I think that you have a very incredible story, Luiza, and I am so happy and thankful that you got to share that with everybody today, because I'll say it every week that there is power in sharing, and talking about the issues and things that people go through is the only way to make that connection and to really make people feel okay to talk about whatever it is they're going through.
Yes, very beneficial.
Absolutely. So again, Luiza, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really, really do appreciate it.
Yep, no problem.
Thank you again, Luiza, for coming on the podcast. It was actually very incredible to hear your story and to learn more about what you go through. And just by you being there and being vulnerable, it really does give people the courage and the strength to speak up as well. So thank you very much. Check out her Facebook pages below. They're in the show notes. It's always good to have more resources and more opportunities to reach out to people that need to have them. So make sure you check them out. Facebook pages in the links in the show notes below. Hope you liked the podcast today. If you did, give us a like, give us a share, give us 5 stars, give us whatever podcast app you listen on. Just like us. I mean, I was just looking the other day, and our majority of our listeners aren't even where we're located in Wisconsin. It's located all across the US and it's located all across the world. And I think that's really cool, because then I know people around the world want to hear that. So the more that we can get this podcast out there, the better. So if you like it, share, subscribe, follow, rate, whatever you can, write a little review about us, write that I have this amazing radio voice that I claim to have been told that I have. I'm just kidding. Please don't do that. So no, give us a like, give us a follow. Anything you can do helps out the podcast. Check out the Center for Suicide Awareness on our social pages. Check out our website, www.centerforsuicideawareness.org. You can learn a little bit more about the organization and the things that we bring to the table for people that are in need. We're not just doing a podcast. We're actually doing trainings. We're doing all sorts of other things that I know a lot of people could benefit from. So the best thing you can do is check it out on our website, or check us out on our other social pages: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, Discord. All are at Center for Suicide Awareness in Kaukauna, Wisconsin. If you have questions for me, comments, concerns, anything, really, I want to hear it, because that's how Luiza got on the podcast today. She emailed me. Email me, Aaron, AARON, at centerforsuicideawareness.org. I want to hear it. I want your feedback. I want to give you the platform. I always talk about that every single week. The platform that gives you the opportunity to speak about whatever it is that you want. I want people to hear your story, if you're willing to share it, that is. So again, you can always email me directly, Aaron, AARON, at centerforsuicideawareness.org, or you can go to our website and there is a form you can fill out very briefly, quick, and it goes right to me. So again, you can get in contact with us if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. So the one thing that I'm really super proud about is the fact that throughout the whole pandemic, throughout the entire duration of 2020, we were able to maintain our hope line. And I'm glad that we have that, because people used it. And honestly, if we have to stick every dime we have at this organization into the hope line, we would do that, because that is such a valuable resource for people. So what the hope line is a text-based emotional support service that we offer free of charge. All you'd have to do is get on your phone or whatever platform you can use to send text messages and send the word HOPELINE to 741-741, and you'll be connected to a trained specialist that we have on staff free of charge to talk about any of those issues. And again, it doesn't have to be suicide. It doesn't have to be just depression. It could be financial issues. It could be relationship issues. It could be if you want more advice, or if you want information for a friend that might be going through it, or a family member. It's kind of a catch-all thing. We have the resources. We want people to use that. So again, all you would have to do is text the word HOPELINE to 741-741. It's just it's a crazy thing, like I said at the top of the podcast, that we're 40-ish episodes in, and there's no signs of stopping. What's really awesome is doing this podcast has really given me a drive to create more stuff, to find new ways to connect with people. And I thought of this really cool idea when we can start getting out back into the world and we can start being at events and talking with people. I have some really cool things and ideas in the works. So we're going to make that happen in 2021. I know we are. Obviously being safe, of course, but we're going to do it. Like I say every week, be kind to one another. Be kind. You are loved and you are important. And remember, you are not alone. Take care, everybody. Bye.